Luke 14, 1 through 11. This is the word of the Lord. One Sabbath, when he went to dine at the house of a ruler of the Pharisees, they were watching him carefully. Behold, there was a man before him who had dropsy. And Jesus responded to the lawyers and the Pharisees, saying, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not?" But they remained silent. Then he took him and healed him and sent him away. And he said to them, "Which of you, having a son or an ox that has fallen into a well on a Sabbath day, will not immediately pull him out?" And they could not reply to these things. Now he told a parable to those who were invited, when he noticed how they chose the places of honor, saying to them, "When you are invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not sit down in a place of honor, lest someone more distinguished than you be invited by him. And he who invited you both will come and say to you, 'Give your place to this person.' Then you will begin with shame to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, and go in and sit in the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, 'Friend, move up higher.' Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Friends, the grass withers and the flowers fade, but the word of our God stands forever. I recently read an article that is kind of in the technology world, and this article was about how our culture is overwhelmed with emails that are scams. There are scams that come across in emails all the time, and the person on the other end, whoever that is just out to get one person. And if you have spent any time in the information technology world and you have been kind of quizzed on how do I understand what's a real email versus a scam or a fake, the people in the information technology world are going to tell you, "Hey, well, look at the emails that you receive on a regular basis. Look at those emails, because the genuine emails, typically, you can tell there's a real sender. And when you click into that sender, it still reveals the name of that person. Then you can look at the grammar, and you can see, is it correct grammar? Or you can look at the sentence structure, and are there run-on sentences that are going on in the body of that email?" And what people in the information technology field will tell you is if those things are not happening in the email that you got, there's bad grammar, there's bad sentence structure. When you click on the sender's name, it doesn't match what was originally there. Most likely the email you're looking at is a scam. And so we have to understand how to spot what's genuine versus what's fake. What's happening in this text is so very important, because the Pharisees and the lawyers are religious leaders. And Jesus is confronting these religious leaders, and he's calling them out for their arrogance, for their lack of humility, for their lack of love. And as he calls them out, he is holding himself up as the true shepherd. And he's holding himself up as the true shepherd in these ways. He's entering into the messiness of our world. As the true shepherd, Jesus enters into the messiness of our world, putting himself in danger. The second thing he does in this text is, as our true shepherd, he confronts error with truth, protecting us from danger. And the third thing he does is he willingly lays down his life for the sheep, rescuing us from danger. Those 3 points are in your notes. But let me take the first one. As our true shepherd, Jesus is kind of holding himself up. When you compare him to the religious leaders that are in this text, Jesus Christ, our true shepherd, enters into the messiness of our world. So what's happening in this text in verses 1 and 2 is that you begin to see Jesus come to a dinner. He's been invited to a dinner from a Pharisee. And he comes into that dinner, and the people who are there are religious leaders and this one man. And this one man is a man who is described as having a condition called dropsy. What that basically means is he had edema. Some of his body parts were swollen, most likely because of a heart condition or a kidney condition. And so he was very, very ill. And Jesus is coming in to this dinner. And the Pharisees, the religious leaders, are standing there, and the text says that they're watching him closely. And this phrase, watching him closely, is so very important because the watching him closely actually means watching insidiously. And one commentator actually says they are watching him to entrap him. And if you begin to look at the use of the word in Luke 6 and in other places in the New Testament like Acts 9, you're going to see that the purpose is the same. It refers to how someone is being watched. And in Luke 6, it's to accuse him. In Acts 9, it's to kill him. They are watching his every move because they want to see, is he going to heal this guy on the Sabbath? Is he going to violate our Sabbath interpretations and heal this man? They're watching him carefully. And this is so very important because it reveals the why. It reveals why he was invited to dinner. It reveals why the man is even there. Their intent is not some great meal to have community with each other and friendship with each other, which is what meals meant. Their purpose is to get rid of him. That's the intent. That's the purpose. And Jesus knowingly enters into the messiness of these circumstances. How do we know that? How do we know that he knows what's happening or that he knows what's about to happen? Proverbs 5:21 says, "For a man's ways are before the eyes of the Lord, and he ponders all his paths." 1 Chronicles 28:9, "For the Lord searches all hearts and understands every plan and thought." Then Matthew 9:4, which is Jesus addressing this same group of people, says, "Why do you think evil in your hearts?" Jesus knowingly enters into the messiness of these circumstances. Why does he do it? Why does he willingly put himself in danger? It's for the sake of the sheep. It's for the sake of people like me and you. There's a story in John 8 of a woman who is brought to Jesus in the midst of his teaching. This woman, the Pharisees and the religious leaders say, was caught in the midst of adultery, literally caught in the act. And she's brought before Jesus, and she is put before Jesus because they want to see, is he going to say what needs to be said? Is he going to sentence her to death, which was stoning? And they put her there, and they're waiting on Jesus to respond. Jesus crouches down and begins to write something in the dirt. And he stands up, and he looks at this crowd of men, and he said, "Let him who is without sin throw the first stone." And then he crouches back down and begins to write again. John says, one by one, these men left. And the people that are left are Jesus and the woman. Jesus, who has the right to judge her, Jesus, who has the right to wag his finger in her face and say, "Look at what you've done," says these words. He says, "Where are they? Has anyone condemned you?" And the woman responds, "No one, Lord." And Jesus' words to her says, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." That is a messy situation that Jesus had to deal with. He could have walked away. He could have chosen not to deal with it at that time. But Jesus stayed right there in the midst of those messy circumstances, he confronted her accusers. He did not condone her sin, but he actually forgave it. Jesus is not afraid of the messiness of your life or my life. He's not afraid of that mess. And just like we read in Proverbs 5:21, 1 Chronicles 28:9, and Matthew 9, he already knows it. He already knows the messiness of our sin. He already knows the messiness of our relationships. He already knows those things that we struggle with, those temptations that we fall to every time we confess them, and yet we do them again and again and again. He knows them. And he says, bring me your mess. Give it over to me. Surrender it to me. And let me forgive you. Go and sin no more. He is our true shepherd who enters in to the messiness of our lives, but he also is the true shepherd who confronts error with truth. This is verses 3-6. He continues with this dinner. He continues with this meal, and he looks at the Pharisees, again, who are watching him closely, and he asks them 2 questions. The first question he asks is it lawful to heal someone on the Sabbath or not? Jesus is not asking this question for information, and he's not asking this question for permission. He's asking them this question because they need to deal with the answer. Because if they answer yes, it is lawful to heal, then they can be accused of being a hypocrite. If they answer no, they can be accused of inhumane treatment. Why? Because see, Jesus knew, as they did, that there were exceptions to the Sabbath regulations that allowed a person or an animal to be rescued if that person or animal was in distress. Benjamin Glad, who is a New Testament professor at Reformed Theological Seminary, says this: to forbid the deliverance of humans would have meant they treated their animals better than people. In keeping the legalistic minutiae, they had missed the point of the law. They neither loved God nor their neighbor, but were lovers of position and self. I want you to hear that again. In keeping the legalistic minutiae, they neither loved God nor their neighbors. They were so concerned about the legalistic minutiae that not only were their actions wrong, but their theology was messed up as well. They weren't lovers of God, they were lovers of self. And that really is the first error that Jesus confronts. It is that their theology is wrong. Lovers of God and lovers of self. You are taking the legalistic interpretations of the law and applying them when what's really important is showing grace and mercy in this moment. And the crazy thing is when you look at this scene, you see who is speaking, and it's Jesus Christ, the Son of God, the Messiah, standing before these very religious men, these very educated men, and what they don't see is that the one standing before them is the Messiah. He is the Son of God. He is the one who created the Sabbath and knows that it is for rest, and he has the authority to govern the rules and all the regulations over the Sabbath, which is why you see the next scene. There's no answer from the religious leaders because they have nothing to say. And so Jesus, in his grace, in his mercy, in his compassion, takes hold of the man and heals him. And this man is healed of his condition. He is healed of that swelling. He is healed of that heart condition. And what he's doing in that moment is he's showing these religious leaders, he's showing not only the religious leaders, but he's showing you and me that as he shows grace and compassion to this person whose body parts are swollen because of a heart condition, what he's also showing us is that these Pharisees, these religious leaders, and honestly you and me, need his touch, his healing just as much as anyone else. Why? Because each of us has a heart condition, and the heart condition is causing us to be swollen up with pride. We are swollen up with pride, self-sufficiency. We can handle it. We can do it. We have the resources. We can handle everything that life throws at us. It is an issue of pride that these Pharisees are swollen up with, and the reality is we are as well. There is a heart condition that everyone in this room has, and it is that our hearts are sick with sin, as Jeremiah tells us. Tim Keller, in his book, Counterfeit Gods, says this: the human heart takes good things like a successful career, love, material possessions, family, and turns them into the ultimate things. Our hearts deify them as the center of our lives because we think they can give us significance, security, safety, fulfillment, and we think we can attain them. See, the highest point of pride is to think that you have all of the ability within yourself to satisfy your hunger for significance, for security, for safety, and fulfillment. And what Jesus is saying in this moment as he heals this man is he's saying, actually, what you need the most is you need your heart to be washed in the blood of Jesus Christ. You need to find your significance, your security, your safety, and your fulfillment, not in the things of this life, but in a relationship with the God who is the creator and the lover of your soul. Several years ago, back when Dylan and I were raising our kids, and they were really, really young. I think it was back in about 2004, and the reason I remember the date is because my mother had cancer, and there were all kinds of things going on. There was that going on, and I was in school, and we had 4 daughters, and it was just so much, and we finally decided, you know what? I think what we need is we need a timeout. We need to go and talk to our pastor who married us. And he looked at me as we were there together as a couple, and he said, "Do you trust Dylan?" And I said, "I do." And he said, "Then I want you to hear me say this." He said, "Your shoulders are not broad enough to handle everything that you're trying to take on." See, the ultimate point of arrogance and pride is that you are self-sufficient and you don't need anyone or anyone else. You have everything you need within yourself. And what Jesus is saying, if you keep on that road, you won't have me. Jesus, the true shepherd, confronts error with truth. He's protecting us from danger. But the third thing he does is this. Jesus, our true shepherd, out of humility, love, and sacrifice, he lays his life down for the sheep. This is verses 7 through 11. 7 through 11 is really a parable. But what happens is Jesus is still at this same dinner, and everybody begins to scramble for a seat. And the goal is they want to sit as close to the honored guest as they can. Because the closer you are in proximity, the more important you're perceived to be. And so they're all scrambling for the seat of honor. They're all scrambling to be next to this person. And Jesus sees it and begins to tell them a parable. The whole point of the parable is to illustrate the truth it found in verse 11. That all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. That's what he's trying to illustrate, and he does it by using a dinner feast, something very common to even everyone in this room. He tells us what not to do, and he tells us what to do. And what we don't do is we enter in and we basically take the seat of honor, and then when the real guest of honor arrives, the host has to come and say, hey, I need you to move seats, which is embarrassing and called shame. But instead, Jesus says, here's what you do. You go in and you take the lowest seat first. You take the lowest place of honor, and then if you need to be moved up, you let the host come and actually move you up. And what Jesus is doing is he is using a proverb, illustrating a proverb from Solomon in Proverbs 25, 6-7, that says, do not put yourself forward in the king's presence or stand in the place of the great, for it is better to be told, come up here, than to be put lower in the presence of a noble. See, what Jesus was illustrating is verse 11. It's better for you to take the lowest place. Well, that was to the religious leaders. Why should we, as followers of Christ, care about humility? Why should we, as followers of Christ, care about that parable and the meaning of that truth? Well, because here's the thing. If you are someone who would call yourself a follower of Christ, your goal is to be like him. And here's what he did. We see this in Philippians 2, where Paul says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in all things, in humility, consider others more important than yourself. Count others more significant than yourself. And then Paul goes ahead and said, here's what Jesus, the Son of God, did. He humbled himself by taking on the form of a man. And let me be clear, as he took on human form, as he took on that form, he did not leave any of his deity in heaven. He didn't shed any of that deity. He was fully God and fully man. But here's the thing. He didn't come as a 30-year-old man. He came as a baby who had to depend on others to be changed, to be fed, to be held. And then he humbled himself to be submissive to sinful parents, to obey a sinful government, to be obedient to death, and even death on a cross, which was the worst kind of death you could die. And then he was exalted, resurrected on the third day, ascended into heaven, and sits at the right hand of God the Father Almighty. Why does it matter that he did all of that? Because if you're a follower of Christ, our life is to be wrapped up in his. Or as Paul says, our life is to be hidden with his. We are to demonstrate him, humility, sacrifice, and love. And he did it perfectly. And we can't do it perfectly. But what we can do is have the right theology. We love God, and we love our neighbors as ourselves, and we believe and trust in Christ by faith. I'll end with this. This is just a quick story. There were two men who were going on a trip together, and they were friends, and they were getting on a plane, and these men had different seats. One was in first class, and one was not. And what was happening was this man who sat in first class, he had sat in first class tons and tons of times. His friend had never sat in first class. And so the guy in first class decides, you know what, I'm going to go give him my ticket. I'm going to give him the opportunity to sit in first class. And so he goes and he says, I want you to sit in my seat. I want you to enjoy the benefits of first class. And the guy was overwhelmed with excitement. He got to experience the comforts. He got to experience the meal. He got to experience the one-on-one attention. He got to experience great things about sitting in first class. But here's the thing. The only reason he got to experience those amazing benefits was because of a relationship. If he didn't have that relationship, those benefits would not be his. In a relationship with Jesus Christ, we have the benefits of our forgiveness of sins. We have the presence of the Holy Spirit living inside of us. We have the opportunity to live with him eternally forever in heaven. We have an identity that is Christ's identity. We have his righteousness. We are a new creation, but here's the thing, none of that matters without a relationship with Jesus Christ. We already read John 10:27, but I'm going to say it one more time. John 10:27 says, my sheep hear my voice. I know them, and they follow me. My hope for you as we close in prayer is simply this. If you are hearing the still, small voice of your true shepherd calling out to you, my prayer is that you would not turn from him, but turn towards him. Trust in him, believe in him, and accept him by faith. And may today, for some of you in this room, be the very first day of your salvation.
We hope you enjoyed this sermon from First Presbyterian Church in Starkville, Mississippi. If you want to find out more about our church and our ministries, please visit fpcstarkville.org. If you'd like someone to reach out to you and maybe grab coffee or lunch to get to know us a little bit better, you can go to fpcstarkville.org/connect and fill out the form there. And if you like what you're doing and want to see more, go to fpcstarkville.org/give to give.